Boston University.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I shan't talk more about myself. I'm in a room with my name on a bunch of posters. It's doing terrible things for my ego. I'm very happy to be here. This will be a lecture, a performative lecture, entitled How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Slop, mainly focused around artificial intelligence and the content generated by it. 35 some minutes with the floor open for questions afterwards. So hold them in, we'll talk about the entire thing after I'm done. How I learned to stop worrying and love the slop. A theory of AI Slop and necromemetics. First, we're gonna watch some good old slop. If you're on Facebook, if your parents are on Facebook rather, you might have seen some of these weird videos pop up. The interesting thing is that they get a very large amount of likes and reshares, mainly due to, well, usually some kind of like cultural reference or whatnot, but they are very much in the realm of this irreality that on our supposedly real social media tend to be quite popular. So you get the gist. Santa Claus and other lies. Nobody told me that wrestling was fake. Bound to the convex glass of the TV screen, I winced at the aerial jabs and drop kicks, recoiled as foldable chairs embraced the burly backs of brutal wrestlers. My cousins sat next to me, similarly transfixed. Enrolled by the humid Boca Raton air, did they know? What the public wants is the image of passion, not passion itself. Roland Barthes. Black is turning blue. On March 28, 1757, I stood bundled in cheap wools on the Place des Grèves in the 4th arrondissement. The doors of the Hôtel de Ville slowly opened, its heavy hinges humming as soldiers pulled on the mass brass handles. Surrounded by an army strong enough to take Paris, Robert François Damien appeared, his face haggard, prison clothes tattered, horses towering over him. For attempted regicide, Robert was quartered for hours in front of a cheering crowd. The public execution is a ritual of royal strength and social catharsis. Murderers and traitors are walked onto the gallows where the state's sharp might slices their heads off. On some days, it ties nooses. On others, it orders 4 horses to go as fast as they can. The execution is humiliation and necropolitics. It is the state's reminder of its sovereign ability to unilaterally confer death upon the living. The tortured body is first inscribed in the legal ceremonial that must produce, open for all to see, the truth of the crime. Foucault. The Emperor's Thumb. Necropolitics is a concept developed by political theorist Achille Mbembe, referring to the exercise of power by sovereign authorities to determine who lives and who dies. It describes how political power is enacted through the subjugation of life to death, focusing on the ways in which states or other entities create conditions where certain groups or individuals are subject to violence, exclusion, or symbolic or literal death. The perp walk is such an example of symbolic death. It is highly notable that in the United States, the perp walk occurs before any verdict is rendered, when the perp is still, according to our system, presumed innocence. Thus, the symbolic punishment is made salient before the crime as a tool of dissuasion to other would-be criminals, but also as a tool of myth-making to the public. The function of the wrestler is not to win, It is to go exactly through the motions which are expected of him. Again, Roland Barthes. Duh. Wrestling is a choreographed performance that enacts the known myths of the Western world. Like in La Comédie de l'Arte, there are archetypal characters whose story journeys we know and love to observe. In professional wrestlings, bad guys are called heels. They are the antagonists to the good guys, which are known as faces. Heels are meant to get the crowd to hate them, and they're often use underhanded tactics like cheating or using foreign objects like the chair that I mentioned. American wrestling, Barth observes, hinges on the dichotomy of good versus bad, where, of course, good always wins. In 1903, before the term was even coined, NYPD Inspector George W. McCluskey arrested important members of the Morello crime family, the powerful mafia group at the time. After a night in a cell, McCluskey made the handcuffed suspects walk through Little Italy in front of their peers and fellow Italian immigrants. Historian Thomas Repetto writes that the parade of mafiosi were taken from the Italian police who orchestrated similar spectacles to dramatize the powerlessness of the criminals. The gesture of the vanquished to the world, a defeat to which, signifying to the world a defeat to which, far from disguising, he emphasizes and holds it like a pause in music, and it corresponds to the mask of antiquity, meant to signify the tragic mode of spectacle. It's me, Ruby, November 4, 1963. I taped all of Lee's appearances on television. The 24-year-old was paraded in front of all cameras to answer questions. Young guy, thin guy, eyes sloping downwards like a troubled fox. I rewatched the interviews and paused to study the facial reaction and tics that bubbled onto his hollow face. The regicide. Hair to Damiens, 11:21. As Lee answered questions, flanked by tall police officers in dark suits and uniforms, a figure obscured the camera. Jack pulled out a .38 caliber Colt Cobra and shot the perp. The ceremony, the ritual, is violently ruptured by the chaos of uncontrollable death. An untimely final act. The real's revenge, perhaps. The grandiloquent truth of all jesters on life's great occasions. Charles Baudelaire. No, Rudy. Perp walks were made popular again in 1980s by then Attorney General Rudy Giuliani, who at the time was running a tough on crime agenda. Giuliani understood that spectacle was crucial in heightening the visibility of the agenda's success. Giuliani's perp walks represented a throwback to an earlier era of public punishment, where power was displayed through the body of the condemned. According to criminal law professor Lloyd Levinson, Rudy Giuliani made an art form out of perp walks. He paraded corrupt bankers, drug dealers, mob members, all in an effort to elevate the public standing of prosecutors and to remind all that no one is above the state, no one is above the law. The performance of safety is as important as safety itself. Perp walks were always an art form, always a form of theater. Why did you feel to go to the helicopter to greet him? I was at a conference a few days ago with top CEOs. The shooting really traumatized the entire industry. I wanted to send a strong message with the police commissioner that we were leading from the front. I wanted to be there to show the symbolism of that. Mayor Adams, 2024. The hero with a million faces. Myths work in monocultures, meaning when they're singular. Myths work when we share an understanding, when we all converge on a singular scapegoat. The heel, the loathsome mafioso, the morally bankrupt white-collar criminal, the murderer where, in most cases, they were palatable objects of ill will. As scapegoats, their image effectuated the required societal catharsis, expunging the angst held tightly within the collective psyche. Mangioni's perp walk exemplifies the contention with myth-making in a pluriculture. Where there was once a convergence, there was now a dislocation. The image of the perp walk was once monolithic, serving the state, the prosecution, demonstrating its power and righteousness. The meaning has now splintered. It has become polysemic. Now, many myths emerge. You're applauding for justice, right? Colin Jost responding to the crowd cheering after he mentioned Luigi on SNL, December 21st, 2024. Masked Avenger. A pseudo-event, a term popularized by Borstein in his book, The Image, A Guide to Pseudo-Events in America, is an event produced by a communicator with the sole purpose of generating media attention. Whereas propaganda tends to slant the facts to keep the public from learning the truth, pseudo-events provide the public with artificial facts that the people can perceive as real. The perp walk is the quintessential pseudo-event. It exists for the purpose of being mediatized. It is organized so that the public can capture the very essence of the spectacle of power. Why the grand parade? Why the unnecessary ceremony? Why does it look like a Marvel movie? Because it is. It's all capes and villains, heroes and thieves, faces and heels, good guys and bad guys. It is fiction in as much as it is factitious. The events are real, but their significance is created through the pageantry of spectacle, through images. There is a myth at play here. Read it as you want. Every perp walk is a repetitive sequel to the original myth. Icons are a site of projection, and in large part sites of fantasy. It is a quasi-spiritualism that transforms figures flawed in their everyday humanity into simultaneous saints and martyrs. Legacy Russell. An image is synthetic, an image is believable, an image is passive, an image is vivid and concrete, an image is simplified, an image is ambiguous. The image lets us believe for an instant that we are not alone. An image is synthetic, an image is believable, an image is passive, an image is vivid, an image is concrete, an image is simplified, an image is ambiguous. The image lets us believe for an instant that we are not alone. The image lets us believe for an instant that we are not alone. Chapter 3. Necromemetics. Our society does not shy away from the wretched barbarity of necropolitics. It has, however, developed more ways to subtly comfort death symbolically. Necromemetics is a term I coined to express the process through which symbolic death is enacted on individuals or groups through the repetitive circulations of visual images, memes, and videos. Could be a celebrity, could be an athlete or whatever, but as we repeatedly circulate these images, we essentially strip them from an aspect of their humanness. These images, through the widespread reproduction, reinterpretation, strip the subject of agency, dignity, or humanity, reducing them to objects of ridicule, adoration, moral condemnation, or martyrdom in the digital sphere. The perp walk and its mediatization is an early form of necromemetics. Good or bad, the groups and individuals become mere icons, symbolically dead and frozen for incessant consumption. Graphic designers in the room who play with images, who hopefully want their images to disseminate, propagate, who will put the faces of individuals on images, should be aware of the potential death they confer through the act of photoshopping. A very dangerous tool, Photoshop with necromemetics. Necromemetics is the effectuation of sovereign and collective power in the realm of the digital. It turns bodies into pure symbols, pure signs, icons. Under symbolic death, the icon becomes ripe for remix, memification, and partisan exegesis. In the words of Legacy Russell, they become sites of projection and fantasy. Fantasy is a negative version of a religious myth. Rosemary Jackson. Amende honorable. Necrometics is the main output of culture wars. Symbolic death feels like power in the tiny fingers of the fast-typing, belligerent egregores. But when the needle pricks and pierces the epidermis, when the poison is pushed patiently through the perpetrator's veins, when the body rigidifies itself under the weight of death slowly coming on, there is no more image, There is no more myth, and that is the true expression of power. Do they know? Under the conditions of necropower, the lines between resistance and suicide, sacrifice and redemption, martyrdom and freedom are blurred. Mbebe. The slop rises. AI Slop refers to the pervasive wave of quickly produced, low-quality AI-generated content currently flooding platforms like Facebook and TikTok. While this proliferation can be viewed optimistically as the cost of content creation is being lowered by these new technologies, it raises significant concerns regarding the media, our media consumption habits. Essentially, AI Slop is what emerges when the technological ease of creation meets our human appetite for rapid and unconstrained entertainment. The fluff test. A primary concern of mine with AI Slop is that individuals are typically poor media nutritionists, naturally drawn towards content that provides immediate gratification. Given the choice between engaging with complex materials such as a challenging book, a nuanced film, or an extended conversation, and the instant dopamine reward by a 50-second AI-generated TikTok, audiences are predisposed to favor simplicity and immediacy. The tendency is worrisome as it conditions audiences to prefer shallow, rapidly consumable content over deeper, potentially more meaningful experiences. Siren Slop. Countering the alluring pull of AI Slop requires deliberate resistance, actively choosing to engage with content that demands patience and sustained attention, even when doing so is difficult or uncomfortable. Cultivating that resistance involves intentionally watching films that unfold slowly. Hello, Chantal Hockerman. Even when they initially feel tedious or unrewarding, it means listening attentively to music that doesn't offer instant hooks or straightforward pleasures. It involves collectively committing to reading complex texts that may seem daunting at first glance. By consciously opting for difficulty and complexity, audiences can build resilience against the appeal of easily digestible slop, but that is ultimately unfulfilling. Slop physics. AI Slop possesses inherent advantages over art. It moves quickly, it adjusts quickly, and it adjusts to the consumer's preferences and spreads rapidly due to its magnetic, addictive, and algorithmic qualities. Conversely, art often defies these very properties. It requires dedicated time, thoughtful engagement, curation, and sustained emotional and intellectual investment. Moreover, art can be divisive, frequently provoking disagreement or discomfort rather than broad, effortless appeal. Note that not the one on the right, but on the left is like a bunch of likes, even if it's slop. Thus, the physics, which is a term I borrow from Carlin Busta and Little Internet when they talk about the physics of media here, the physics of AI Slop inherently favors its proliferation over the genuinely challenging and innovative cultural products that I'm hoping you guys are producing. Sing About Me. Modern society exhibits a pronounced cultural thirst for images, a compulsive need to capture, possess, and circulate visuals. Such greed reflects a deeper desire to control and arrest reality. Yet, paradoxically, this control is illusory. Images ultimately possess us more than we possess them. They replicate virally and become self-sustaining, even leading us to inadvertently produce more images for consumption. This phenomenon, which I dubbed in my essay, The Treachery of Images, forefronts the addictive and parasitic relationship we have with visual media. With advances in AI and aesthetic imagery, society is beginning to exhaust the repository of existing images, further evidencing our troubling addiction to visual consumption. flatness. Philosopher Frederick Jameson, in his book Postmodernism, compares Warhol's diamond shoes with Van Gogh's peasant shoes to illustrate a point about contemporary and traditional imagery. So, we're in a school of visual arts. Wonderful students, what do you see when you look at the Warhol image? Don't be shy.
Vibrant.
Come again?
Vibrant.
Vibrant what?
Lady shoes.
Lady shoes. Okay. More than lady shoes. What kinds of lady shoes are those?
Elegant.
Yeah. Why are they elegant? What do they represent?
Like fancy. High.
Yeah. What are some of the visual elements we see from these shoes that maybe tell us that they're fancy?
Satin.
Satin, yeah.
Bow.
A bow. What else? Pointy.
Narrow.
Mm-hmm. You can imagine potentially that there's maybe a heel below these.
They're practical.
Yes.
Meaning for standing or doing something, dining, doing something elitist, essentially.
There is a textual element here also that gives us a little tip. What's the textual element here?
Brand name.
Yes. Who said that? What's your name?
My name's Shannon.
Shannon. Brand name. Very good, Shannon. We have the brand name. Now let's compare these with Van Gogh's peasant shoes. What do we have in front of us now? Shannon, you want to go again?
No.
Fair. In the back?
These shoes are here, right?
Yeah, on the left.
They're like torn up, very rugged. The image itself is dark and oh yeah. That was all.
Yeah.
They're boots.
Mm-hmm.
They look worn.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked about what they are, right? Like, these are branded, potentially stilettos or pointy, fancy shoes. As the name suggests, these are peasant shoes. Now, let's talk about how they're decidedly represented. What is the perspective we have on both here?
I feel like the ones on the left are very much defined by like the texture and like the hyper detail.
Yes.
The ones on the right are just like silhouette and like threshold, like just like slight texture, you know.
The like boots are in this like grimy green color where the like nice shoes are all in these like pastels kind of like lit up brightly.
Mm-hmm. We can potentially even intuit that these were not the actual colors of the shoes.
There's so much care in the painting of this pair of beat-up shoes, in the sense of how much time and effort it took to depict something that so many of us would not even think to look twice at, versus the inherent disposability of both, like the flatness of how flats and heels are depicted, and being colored over. There's something disposable about them.
Yeah, I mean, the name of this chapter sort of gives the hint here. There is no depth, sort of visually, in the Warhol diamond dust shoes. You could, staring at, of course, we're staring at a 2D image here, but you can imagine the sense of perspective that exists within the Van Gogh painting. Warhol's work embodies the postmodern flatness designed for immediate importation. We have something that we recognize instantly. We have the logo mark and whatnot, which I don't know if this brand still exists, but at the time might have been sort of relevant. While Van Gogh's painting invites viewers for deeper contemplation, wondering perhaps about the life story of the person who wears these shoes, complexities and depth both visually and also from a interpretation or reading of the image. Contemporary digital culture frequently promotes flatness and immediacy over depth and sustained engagement. The popular, rapidly consumable content on Instagram, for instance, coupled with the digital platform's framing, it was 1-1, now it's at 4-3, entrenches the superficial interaction with the image. Heidegger speaks of an enframing, and the enframing changes the way that we think. And so when suddenly I can only take images in square form, it also changes the way that I see. As a result, we must be cautious and critical of how technology enframes, shapes, and potentially limits our ways of seeing and feeling, as we have many other senses. Where is the Instagram for taste or the Instagram for smell? A couple of $1 million ideas right now, so. The best images come from dark rooms. In our contemporary moment, the ubiquity of digital images and their incessant proliferation threaten to erode our imaginative faculties. When every conceivable visual experience is readily available through AI or otherwise, our capacity for creative novelty and depth of engagement becomes compromised. To counter this crisis, the practice of visual asceticism emerged as a compelling antidote, deliberately reducing and carefully managing my visual intake to recalibrate the senses and revive authentic creative exploration. I'm assuming a lot of you, like myself, last year are on Pinterest, Arena, Cosmos every single day, like thousands of images every day, if not more, in order to source the perfect inspiration for your posters and your projects. Visual asceticism. These are my rules for 2025. I am allowed to watch 12 movies maximum this year. I have 10 minutes of Instagram per day, 1 hour of Twitter and TikTok, but it must be followed by a 15-minute writing down in the Notes app of my favorite things, no TV shows, and unlimited books. Visual asceticism involves actively resisting the effortless consumption of imagery, scrolling through social media feeds, passively watching algorithmically created content, or constantly capturing everyday life through digital photography. By setting intentional boundaries on visual consumption, I want to create an environment of intentional scarcity, allowing the mind to regain its clarity, its depth. This voluntary constraint mirrors the practice of spiritual or philosophical traditions, which maybe some people here are doing Ramadan right now. I'm doing Lent, so storied practice to limit one intake of either food or media. This asceticism seeks to heighten sensory awareness, clarify perception, deepen connection with the self and the external world. The aphorism, "the best images come from dark rooms," embodies a key principle of this asceticism, that creative insight emerges from moments of absence or intentional deprivation. Historically, artists have understood this implicitly. Photographers cultivate their images in darkness, carefully limiting the exposure to light and allowing latent potentials to fully emerge. Similarly, here, I restrict exposure to external stimuli to allow internal images and ideas to emerge. I give them space and silence so they can form. This visual asceticism reclaims the critical distinction between seeing and looking. While digital platforms encourage rapid and superficial looking, consuming vast number of images without reflection, this practice emphasizes slow, deliberate, and mindful seeing. Under the conditions of visual scarcity, every movie has a new significance. Depth and nuance become apparent once again. My sensory and emotional receptivity are heightened, instead of the numbness that I used to feel when I was visually overloaded. I can rediscover the wonders of encountering genuinely meaningful, thoughtfully considered images, and of course, avoid the slop. Necromemetics relies fundamentally on the symbolic potency and iconic durability of images. For necromemetic processes to function, to transform an individual, into a symbolic icon through images. The images themselves as a medium must retain a degree of cultural weight, an iconic resonance. The potency of symbolic death depends precisely on images having enough symbolic gravity to confer it. AI Slop represents a form of cultural production in which images are stripped of their depth, stripped of their resonance, stripped of their symbolic meaning. Slop's proliferation of empty disposable imagery rapidly erodes the cultural potency required for an image to function necromemetically. The endless flow of trivial, instantly consumable images reduces the individual image's power to convey lasting symbolic meaning or affect meaningful cultural transformation. Think about a thing like the video of the Rodney King assault, or a great cultural moment like Prince at the Super Bowl. This relied on the power of the image to convey that message. Slop, in other words, drowns out meaningful icons with sheer volume and velocity. Slop kills creativity, but also kills necromemetics. Asceticism is not the solution, but I am exposed. Asceticism is not the solution. Retreat, however, leads to defeat. Defeat to sure death, death by images, to death from images, to death through images. I drown. Could Slop be the answer? It is the image's veracity that conveys their power. What happens when images lose their power? What happens when most images are generated, not taken? When all images are known to be slop, like mail-in publicity, immediately discarded, supply and demand. Slop devalues images past the point of no return. There is no more image, only power. Slop lacks the necessary durability and semiotic richness to effectively become symbolic, thereby neutralizing the capacity for symbolic death. Thus, the very qualities that make AI Slop culturally corrosive, superficiality, low cultural half-life, speed, may also offer a radical protection against necromemetic violence. If images cannot hold our collective gaze or imprint lasting meaning, then they cannot inflict symbolic death. Their power breaks down. The image can no longer kill, only drown. While Slop threatens artistic depth and cultural imagination, it simultaneously disrupts the capacity of images to enact necromemetic harm by making symbolic resonance increasingly difficult to sustain. As Slop floods the symbolic landscape, it corrodes the richness of collective imagination, but also disrupts the sinister power of necromemetics. Slop, hollow, shallow, callow, resists iconization. The Ouroboros of AI-generated images speaks its truth through Slop. And as we drown, the image screams, I am nothing. The image screams, I am nothing. The gallows were chimeric. The noose was never tied. We stomp on flatness. The third, fourth, and fifth dimensions emerge victorious. The image has committed suicide. But when the needle pricks and pierces the epidermis, when the power is pushed patiently through the perpetrator's veins, when the body rigidifies itself under the weight of death slowly coming on, there is no more image, there is no more myth. And that is the true expression of power. Do they know?